Well, Bill, do you want to introduce the panel, or you want me
Sure.
to go for
So
it?
yeah, we have a distinguished panel of some of the most successful local sailors that happen to also be in the Shields fleet. So we've got Mike Toppa here, we've got Brad Reed, and we have John Burnham. And we had a little practice run through earlier today, and I was fascinated because they have some great insight as to exactly where the currents are and where to sneak in and when the current changes and stuff. So I'm going to turn it back over to John and have you start off and maybe do a screen share of what you shared earlier today and take us through.
Okay, if I can keep up with my technology here, we'll be good. But I'm well supported, I know. If you have questions, throw them into the chat.
Yep.
Bill's going to keep an eye on it. The rest of us may be able to monitor it as well. Um, and for now, if you can restrain yourselves and maybe keep yourself on mute, that would be great. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to give you a, let's see, this should be, all right, you see in my Navionics view?
Yep. Oh, there it is.
Okay. Um, so if you aren't familiar with Navionics, go to navionics.com. uh, you can look up any chart, and it has, which Brad showed me today. I'd forgotten how to get here, but in the lower left-hand corner, there's these two options, the Navionics view and the sonar chart view, which is what we're looking at here, which has a more refined um, view of the bottom. And so what we're going to do is take you through our racing area today, uh, talk a little bit about Narragansett Bay, and then talk about 6 different courses. And we're going to try to keep it short and leave some time for questions. But we'll talk a little bit about what we each are looking at in different circumstances. Um, so it's a little daunting for me to be on the screen with these guys because they're both Rhode Islanders. I've only lived here for 30
Hey,
some years.
I'm from Seekonk, Massachusetts.
Oh,
Let's get that straight.
okay.
Right.
So I have lived here over 30 years, and my first time sailing on this amazing body of water was in 1979 J24 season with Ed Adams, and so it was um, pretty cool. And one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is current. And as you all know, if you've raced around here, there's a lot of current, particularly in the deep water here. It generally goes north and south. And for that J24 Worlds, the final race, which anybody who did it will probably still say was one of the most remarkable races they ever did. The starting line stretched all the way across the passage here. And rumor has it that with the ebb tide, the committee boat was not actually anchored, but was motoring to stay south of the fleet. We raced out around Brenton Tower, which is now gone, and then around the island here, around Conanicut Island. It was more than just around the island because there was another turning mark up by uh, NEB.
Dire Island.
And so it was an epic race. It blew 35, maybe more on the backside here. Bill Shore was the first one was leading, ripped his chute, um, maybe capsized and ripped his chute. But he was the first one with the chute back up for the second part of the run, probably a little duct tape up. Anyway, it's indelibly planted on my memory, but I'll never forget how much current we were dealing with at the start. And I thought I'd just ask Brad how long he's been sailing on the bay, and if he has an indelible memory like that.
Well, I actually remember that race. We were putting 420s away on the dock at Barrington Yacht Club. My dad was sailing with Everett Pearson, and that was the Fastnet 1979 storm. That was the weather system that came blowing through Newport and blew 40 here that turned into the Fastnet storm in 79. You know, there's so much current all over this bay. I guess one of the big things that I've learned from coaching is it can be so different than any model that people think are accurate. From Eldridge to the URI tidal charts to our kind of understanding of how the water flows in and out of this bay. A lot has to do with wind strength. A lot has to do with how much rain has come in this, especially in the spring. How much rain is up in the northern part of the bay. How much water is getting shoved out by a pressure system. And I guess what I'd like to say off the bat is take everything that we're saying with a grain of salt, because you have to look around. And everything that we're talking about today, yeah, we'll talk about the cone of Rose Island on either side. We'll talk about Clingstone and how the water wraps around there. Take everything that anybody says with a grain of salt. Use your eyes, use your understanding of what you've seen in the past, and build on it. And that's the most important part of this, is you have to build on what you've learned in the past and what you're seeing in front of you.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Brad. Mike?
I would add to what Brad just said. There's a lot of times that I think I know what's going to happen, or I think I have a firm grasp of what to expect, and it doesn't happen. And, you know, to Brad's point, a lot of times what the current's doing is forecasted to do is actually happening well underwater, but the water on the surface is doing something completely different. And, you know, to Brad's point about rain and wind affecting the surface, the current on the surface, completely different than what's going on underneath, which is what the tide tables, you know, say should happen. And the other thing is that there's always current to deal with, and you can take that and base your game plan on it, your strategy on it. But then you look at that chart right there, the geography of the boundaries of where we sail is so diverse that there's always wind shifts too. So you may be going the right, but then you're going to get countered by a wind shift going the wrong way. So it's really three-dimensional. It's always really challenging, and that's what makes it so much fun to sail here.
So I'll just talk about two sort of macro features of where we sail, which most people know about, but it's always worth a review, I think. Basically, the flood tide goes north and the ebb tide goes south, but we've got this big angle here where the East Passage is going northeast and southwest, and that has a dramatic effect on the flood tide. The current, not all the water can make that hard turn, and so a lot of water goes through this shallow water on the east side of Rose Island, and it happens to a lesser extent here. This is not quite as angled quite as much, but same thing. There can be you got to think about the body of the water has a lot of inertia and will swing towards the outsides of these turns. You also have constriction points, and you know we all know about this one. I'm going to come in just a little bit. Off of Clingstone, that is a very hard turn, and so the current can run very fast by there, but on the ebb, say on the backside of it, there may be some area where it's really not running as fast, and that's again something to look for. Um, Another area where there's a constriction point is up here off of we call this X-ray on our chart. I forget the actual number, but off Coasters Harbor here, that there's definitely a constriction point there. And the other thing that we always have to be aware of, we try to think about a lot, is when's the tide changing next? Because the biggest factors are when if the tide is coming in here hard and going north in these bays, the harbor itself and the whole Jamestown Cove here, the current will start slowing down and turning there first. And the tide always changes where there's friction. It changes where there's either the friction from the bottom coming up or the coast coming in will start slowing it down. And so the main channel, the current may be still going north, but it can easily be, it's usually at least an hour earlier, the tide's already ebbing along the Jamestown shore here. So you get these big eddies, if you will. It happens on Potter's Cove here as well to a lesser extent. Brad and Mike, you want to add anything to that?
No, but I would say that your point about the current changing on the edges first is really true, and you can see it with the boats anchored off Jamestown Boatyard. You can see them turn. You can see the boats turn in Jamestown, and pointing the opposite way you think they would, because the current's already changed a little. A good indicator to look at when we're starting down by Rose Island or heading south.
Yep.
To look over there to see which way they're pointing, to see if the current's starting to change first.
The only thing I want to add is the current relief, not only on the shores, but and we'll get into this a little bit later, but the two cones of current relief on either side of Rose Island. When we're sailing north of the bridge, there's a bit of a cone relief on a flood behind Rose Island, and when the current's ebbing and you're sailing downwind in a southerly south of the bridge, certainly there's what we call a cone of current relief, and that is simply because the water is trying to get, we'll use south of the bridge for a second, that water that's coming in or out of Narragansett Bay is basically creating a vortex around that south part of the island. Then you can really take advantage of. The most confusing part of the current is when we sail south of the bridge, start a race near Fort Adams, and then go and sail northwest up to Z. That is the one that I don't care who you are, no one's figured that out. Bill Shore, you have not figured that out. No one's figured that one out. So it's kind of fun. That's what makes this really, really fun, is to see how people, and I learned something from John in the practice session today, how people think of the wind shift versus current, because you can't just go with one. You have to go with both. Pressure, shift, current, because the boats are only going 5.5 knots. You have to take all those things into consideration.
Okay, thank you. Let me reduce this and switch to a different view here. Whoops, that's not it. This is the one we want. So,
hey, while you're getting that up,
yeah.
If you have any questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll keep looking at the chat, and we'll answer any questions as we go.
Great. Yeah, any burning questions there yet, or
Nope, nothing,
No?
nothing yet.
Okay. So the way our schedule is this summer, only a third of our races are south of the bridge, but we also race south of the bridge on weekends some of the time too. And this is we'll always be doing some races in this area. So we thought we'd start off with a couple courses here. And the slash here is our general starting line area, and typically we're going to either Special Mark 4 or the Government Mark, which is Q on the Sail Newport chart.
The question just came in, John, that I told you was going to come up about Bull Rock.
All right,
Just
we'll
get there.
we'll come to that. So let's say we're starting here and we're going to number 4, the Special Mark off Hammersmith Farm, and then say down to Tracy Ledge, and maybe it's twice around, but it's flood tide. Brad, what do you think about?
So in my view, you know, when the breeze is in about a 200 to 190 and you're sailing to 4 in a flood tide, it generally turns into a fairly good left show. But I am going to say that there will be 1 or 2 boats that have a lousy start that just absolutely ping it right, that can get out of the current up by, you know, Clingstone and come across in maybe a good righty. But the play normally is, you know, if you're sailing, and I don't think you can see my cursor, but could you put your cursor by where the starting line is?
Yep.
So basically, if you can lay Fort Adams from the start, you want to try to get left, you know, or just laying or just underlay to Fort Adams, because you're going to get a lefty out of the cove, and you're also going to get the current relief that you desire on that left side in a flood. So that would be my play.
Mike?
I'd agree with that. However, I would look at, again, when the tide's turning, because you'll often find that, like we talked about earlier, currents start to ebb over by Jamestown, and you get across, actually farther north, you can get across
up in here
into either less adverse current or even some positive current, and then you get back into it when you get around Dumplings, and then you head back in and try to find a ley line going over back to the Newport shore. But Brad,
hey, John,
lucked out, might have been in a change of tide situation.
And you know, to Mike's point there, there's less traffic if you go that direction. You know, one of the things that's hard about this course in a flood, let's just say the flood for a second, Mike, is fully established. There's very few lanes coming off the shore on the left. You know, you have to battle for your lane. You gotta, you know, you're ducking sometimes, you're lee bowing sometimes, and sometimes you can actually do the moonwalk and go backwards by trying to get out of the current in there, while people who are, you know, kind of out of phase with other people, even in more current, can make gains because they're not having to get tacked on or having to duck 3 boats or those kind of things. So what we're saying is we have no freaking idea, but in many ways, we're just telling you what, if there was no other boat on the race course and you could guarantee you could win your side, you do the things that we're talking about. But because there's other boats, there's wind shifts, there's the lull that tends to be off the graveyard, you know, and then, you know, we just play it as we go. You got to keep your head in a swivel.
May 11th, just looking at the tide chart here, May 11th, high tide is at 5 p.m.
So we're right in a change. So
5:45.
we're right in the middle of a change.
So we'll have an ebb getting
Yeah.
started over here.
Right.
So you'll have an ebb started
And
a
maybe
little
coming
farther
out of
north
here.
than that.
Mhm.
The ebb will be starting a little north of that, but the flood, because of the momentum that the flood has, will still be flooding around Clingstone, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it likely will. The one thing I was going to add is that sometimes if you come off the pin here, and you can't quite lay Fort Adams. The breeze gets a
Mhm.
little lighter, and the boats to windward shear off and just roll you. And so that's broken my heart many times. Um,
Mhm.
and it's not it's a wind and current play. Somehow recognizing when that's going to happen is an interesting
Right.
challenge. The other thing I notice is that uh, in the J24 fleet, I think you would always go up this shore because you
Always.
don't lose as much tacking. But if you do a dozen tacks here versus the boat that goes hard right, and I think Bryce Muir perfected that move about 25 years ago, uh, you don't lose all those boat lengths. I mean, what do you lose? A
Mhm.
boat length and a half every time you tack. It's a lot of distance to make up by being smart and finding a lane. Um, what about on the ebb? Same course.
Um, in my mind, you would kind of try to stay in the deep water as much as you can. You play, it allows you to start a little up near the boat. My goal, especially if you're going to queue in an ebb, you start at the boat and continue for a little while, stay in that white water, in the white on the chart as much as you can, and then you just play the shifts in the middle. The biggest problem with the ebb is overstanding from the left. So many people overstand from the left because of the ebb, and it turns into a little bit of a drama up there. So that's a tough one. And then downwind is the biggest thing in the ebb because you're trying to figure out how to get back into the cone. Could you kind of put your cursor at the cone
Which
of
weather
current
mark did you
relief?
go around?
Let's call it 4 for a second. You
Okay.
went around 4, which is the Hammersmith mark, and you're coming back down. When do you jibe out and go straight at Rose Island
Right.
and stay in and Moose is the best in the world at finding that little lane of when to jibe. And it's actually a little earlier than most people think. Most
Right.
people want to stay out of the current along the Fort Adams shore, and many people will jibe early and try to sail directly at Rose Island to get out of the current in the cone there.
And then
I would
jibe
say
into. Go ahead, Mike.
I would say that wind strength has a lot to do with when you jibe, because
Really good point.
light under the shore there, and you get lulled into saying, I'm out of the current, this is good, but there's a lot less wind. And sometimes you get, as you go along the shore there, you get a little bit of a header off the shore, and then you're really trapped because you can't jibe out.
Can't get back out. So while we're talking about this, Mike or John, let's talk about Bull Island for a second. In the sailing instructions, you can't go inside a dumpling, which is a rock near Clingstone, but they've made a change that we can sail inside Bull Island. Can you zoom in on that?
Yeah, I'm actually have this on the
That
other.
was Simon's question, I think.
Yep.
Before we go north of the bridge. There we go. So that island that your cursor's on, we're allowed to go inside. And there is a lot of current relief in there. But it gets crowded. If you're in 7th, you might not want to do it. If you're in 2nd, you might want to do it. So it's kind of where the traffic patterns are.
Yeah, like I've sailed within about 10 feet of this side of the island. So I mean, that's the other side you can, if you're not comfortable going through there. But there is plenty of water.
Plenty of water.
Here, we'll look at the other view. It's, I don't know, what, 15 feet deep there? 12 or 15. And it's just, it's pretty smooth stuff. At least. So nobody's reported hitting anything. All right, so shall we go north of the bridge? Any questions on?
Sure.
Do we have any other questions that we should cover south of the bridge first?
Well, there's nothing else in the chat.
Okay.
Just to answer Pete Denton's, the black areas of the chart are where the contours are super, super tight, and it's a sonar chart. So that's why the black areas on that original chart were just a little hard to see.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
can I just want to make a point. When you are coming south on an ebb tide, but the wind is southwesterly, right at the dumplings, the biggest problem isn't current or wind, it is other boats. And twice in my tenure of being we had boats swamped coming around the dumplings buoy. In other words, they're on starboard tack, and railed down hard, and in both times a sport fish came around that mark and swamped the boat, and one went down within about 20 seconds.
This is next to this buoy or Q here?
Yeah, I can't remember the number, but it's the one, not the one up the up
by Bull Rock.
there, right
Bull
there.
Rock. Yeah, this one.
All right.
It is incredibly dangerous. And we've lost, in 20 years, we've lost 3 boats there. And it's all the same thing. In other words, you're railed down and you're going to Hammersmith, and a sport fish will come down around that buoy and throw like a 4-foot, 3-foot wake, and it floods the boat.
So
I have a comment on this one.
Yeah.
Bryce, you're exactly right. I've never seen more traffic on weekends at 11 o'clock in the morning going around that corner than the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Wednesday nights are different than Saturdays.
Not
Saturdays,
much, though.
I would never, ever send a fleet to Q. You almost don't want to even send them to 4. You'd rather sail in Potter's Cove on those days, or north of the bridge over by Coasters Harbor. Wednesdays, our biggest issue in the last 8 years has been commercial traffic, has been, making sure you stay out of the way of the Adirondack or the Madeline or the car carrier that's coming down. But I do agree with you. It is a very dangerous place to sail on a weekend.
To that note, I think we have requested that we're going to be doing more north of the bridge weekend sailing, and I would call it hybrid, where we're going to start north of the bridge and then maybe come down into Z, or something like that. So we are talking about moving the weekends a little bit.
I mean, the point was earlier to keep your head on the swivel, and if you see it coming, blow your main sheet, blow your vang, straighten the boat up. The 3 boat lengths you lose saves your boat.
all right, thanks for that
Bye.
safety message,
Yeah.
Bryce. That's
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
no, it's good. Thank you. Bryce is a former fleet captain. Former fleet captains get extra time here, right? So we're going to go north of the bridge now and talk about 4 different course directions. And generally, we start down here where this green slash is, in a what is it? Maybe 205 wind direction or 200. We might go to it's called number 10 on the chart. The red nun
It's like
here.
180, 185.
Okay. So the breeze has a little feeling of a little east in it. T here through the bridge we go to quite often, and that is more, maybe that's more of a 205, 210. And then farther right than that is Z. This is a special mark that that one of the race committees puts out. We might go to R, but Z is probably more common. And then sometimes we go to Foxtrot here, the red channel mark that's at the outer end of the Jamestown channel. And they each have some interesting characteristics to them. And I don't think I can show you. Oh, it's my share. Okay, there's a common leeward mark at the very top. Victor is right next to Gould Island. Sometimes we end up at X. This year, hopefully, we end up with gate marks in this vicinity fairly often. So let's talk about the easterly southerly breeze first, and this is one we talked about earlier today. We found we had some different strategies for this one. So Mike, you want to go first on this one? Flood tide, what are you thinking about coming off this line going to here?
Flood tide, I've always thought you have to go left into the less current, and everyone else is thinking the same thing. So you're battling to go start and go straight as you can, stay on starboard, get into the current relief. If you have a bad start, you have to tack away. Then you kind of get into it a little bit later, and it's a struggle. Once you're in the lee of the current lee, less current, I can remember getting left shifts too. So you're going into less current, getting headed, tacking out on a nice port lift, and then somebody tacks on you, so you head back in again. And the danger I found in that scenario is maybe overstanding or getting too far to the left and overstanding the weather mark, letting guys that are to the right of you get in. But I've always thought that playing the left side is pretty important.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that we've got the standoff buoys, the whole string of white buoys now along here, so you can't actually go in all the way. And those buoys are an obstruction, so you need to tack before you cross the line between any two buoys. So you can see the water gets shallower here, but actually when you get past this point, it's a little bit deeper again. So, Brad, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, when we sail in that specific condition, IDA usually sets up the start just north of the red bell there, and then has the leeward mark to leeward. And every single time we're sailing around on the Tinky, we're like, all right, Tim Dawson's going to win the pin and try to win the left. John Burnham's going to win the boat and hit the right corner. Those two guys will be first if they end up winning their starts, and the rest of us are battling it out for 10th. So, what I want to know from you, John, is why do you commit? No one commits to the right in that condition more than you.
Well, we debate this every time. It's not like, okay, flood tide, we're going to go right. But we know there's some values on the right, and so we always think about it. We do end up playing the left as well. And then if we do play the left, we tend to come off Coaster's Island before Mike does, perhaps, because we want to get to this to the cone here, which is what I would call we get some protection here, and we think you get more protection here than if you're in this channel in here. And we're talking about a flood tide again. And I can probably count on one hand the amount of times we've come into this on the port ley line, unless we just missed it on starboard. Because
and does this also follow through to when you go to the Red Nun just to the south of the bridge? I mean, is it the same deal?
This can be a similar discussion, but I'll answer your question first, which is, we don't usually start at the right hand end of the line. We usually start in the middle, and but if conditions are good and we can tack, we will go right sooner than the rest of the fleet sometimes. And what we found, and this is from watching, I feel like this is something Stubby does periodically, very successfully. Hitting the starboard ley line out here, I find that there's often a righty and more velocity because you got this big bridge span here, and I think the breeze comes through more freely there than it does in here, behind the island and behind the bridge where the bridge is lower. And I also think it fans a little bit. So sometimes there can be a 10-degree righty, and anybody anywhere near the starboard side of the course comes in looking famous. So we tend to we look for that. It's not, but there's always a debate.
Right.
I would endorse that because I a couple times fought wide and won the left, thinking that we're in great shape, only to look under the jib and see you coming across on starboard and crossing us.
Well,
Thinking,
I think there's
So I'm going to
others
go
who do
back
that
to
too.
what I said. I'm
Go
going to go
ahead.
back to what I said south of the bridge, and the three boats that get off the left side of the starting line really cleanly and can pick their time to tack onto port will likely win the left and be in that top 2 to 5 group going into, you know, the top of the cone near the top mark. Anybody who bails out after a bad start and goes right, you know, has an opportunity. So I guess what we're saying is both sides have an opportunity in a flood in this situation. I have never sailed that course in an ebb, so I don't even know what to do.
There's one other factor here and that's around this buoy here, X X on the chart, which is that in a flood tide, this can have some of the strongest currents in the bay right here. And I think it's sort of the merger of this main channel current and the channel that's sort of pumping the water that's pumping out of the Newport side here and you know, trying to sweep around this shallow water. And so sometimes it's worth looking at before the start. If you need a reason to get to the starting area early in this condition, it's to look at the water around that buoy. Because sometimes it's really obvious.
I've seen really big waves there.
Yeah.
Because the water, like you say, is getting compressed on the shallow, because the water is getting shallower, it's just coming up and creating these big waves, which is more current, but it can also slow you down if you're going upwind through it. It's a local area, so you want to avoid the waves if you're trying to go upwind against it.
So in an ebb tide, you say you haven't sailed this in an ebb tide, Brad. In an ebb tide, I don't think it's as tricky getting there, but and there I think being on the right, you can often take advantage of a right hand. I'll call it the bridge shift.
Right.
But going back downwind, when I started sailing Shields, it was with Charlie Levy in the late 90s, and his formula was to jibe immediately no matter what was going on, and even if you're going back out in the current, because you would get better breeze, better pressure, and as you came down farther down towards Victor, if that was a leeward mark, you'd be on the inside and you'd be going significantly faster than other boats. I don't. It could be because of the amount of current here by X. You skip that. I'm not sure, but I know we've made it work as recently as the last couple of years.
I would say that we, not so much last year, the year before, we had a lot of races going to the Nun just south of the bridge, and driving quickly always paid off.
Let's talk about that course. So are you thinking so we're talking about T here, Tango.
Right.
which is I always think of this as being really shallow water coming out to it, but it's actually in pretty deep water and it doesn't get shallow for a little while. What do you make of this, Brad?
So this approach to the top mark is really tricky. Are we in a flood or are we in an ebb?
Let's say we're in a flood.
All right, a flood. We talked a little about this earlier today, and this is more of like a 200 to 210 wind direction. And this is one of those wind directions that you can get the cold lefties that are kind of coming off the ocean and the warm righties as you're kind of approaching. Because of our rule that you have to use the center 3 spans, right?
Yep.
This is center 3. You can't really get way into the current relief on the upwind left. So you kind of have to play it. Which shift are we in? Are we in a cold shift, a lefty, or are we kind of digging in and banking on a right? I remember Simon Davidson and us on the Tinky, we were kind of coming up, and we were, and I think Nick Ewenson was in play here, and Simon just pretty much sent it to the right ley line, and he beat us by 5 boat lengths, and we were all kind of overlapped going under the bridge. And I think that was because he just sailed out and he got a little bit more pressure and right. He actually said in the chat that he thinks later in the day those righties can come in. I just don't think the left has that big of a current relief at the end of the beat. You certainly can play it, up the cone, and then you have to dive towards one of the spans. But the upper left doesn't seem to pay as much as it does earlier in the beat.
Yeah, I think that may be a factor of how much velocity is there in the current. Is it a really hard flood, in which case the cone usually is worth it, and you can even cross over to the starboard ley line here after you come out of it. But in the case of Simon, the situation Simon was describing, was he hitting the ley line before the bridge?
No. He was, right in the fray. He just was the first one to exit and
Gotcha.
hit the starboard tack ley line. He just kind of led us all out to the starboard tack ley line, and then we had to just all follow him in.
So, Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I've been beaten several times by boats to the right of us that I thought were in more current, but clearly they were in better breeze, better velocity, clearer airstream. And to your point that you made earlier, once you get around the mark, driving quickly is good because, again, say there's an ebb tide, and you think you want to stay farther right, going downwind, getting into the shallower water. And it's true, there's less current, but there's also less wind. So diving again into that nice freer airstream is always one of.
Plus, if you're in the middle of the fleet, there's a lot more clear air out here than there is. Most boats stay on starboard tack when they exit the weather mark.
And it gets worse if you do round and you stay on starboard and you're going in towards Rose Island in the shallower water. As you approach the bridge, the air gets even more chopped up because then it's getting broken by the bridge and lifting by the bridge, and it's harder to drive back out. So a quick jibe is always better.
Yep. Okay, shall we, anything about the leeward leg, further down the leeward leg here? Whoops.
No, not for me, because we're terrible up there.
You're going to get extra practice this year.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to, why don't we go to the Z mark here, the really long, sort of the Robin Wallace 3-mile beat, and talk about that. Everything.
I missed Robin. Sorry.
Yeah, we all do.
We do.
Brad, your thoughts on the long beat?
So since sailing with Clay, we haven't had this race very often, but I had the chance of watching this race a bunch of times. I'd go out and with our cruising boat and watch this race. And if it's this far right, if the wind is this far right where you're starting in that area, if you could put your cursor up around the word passage, yeah, in that area.
Yep.
If it's that far right in a flood, you have to get to the toll booth. The toll booth puff is there. There's a very, if you could put your cursor in that river that's coming kind of through Jamestown there. See the river on the west side of the toll booth? That little, yeah, that is almost below sea level, where all around it is high. And the breeze just funnels right through there. That's why in all the around the island races, you battle in to get into the toll booth puff. So you have to, and then it's managing lanes out of there and then working your hardest to get into the mooring field in Jamestown. There is very little chance you're going to gain from the left in a flood in that wind direction, especially if it's an established flood. Yeah, if the flood is changing into an ebb or the ebb is changing into a flood, I'm sure there's gains to be had, but that is a full-on right show. You try to win the boat, you try to win the right, you try to win the race.
I was going to say the only exception to that is sometimes at the starting line, you'll have two different wind readings at two ends of the line. It'll be at the pin end, it'll be 10 degrees left of the boat end.
Which one's going to win, John?
And so the question then is, and I think I've seen Bill Shore do this a few times. He's played the left and then he's crossed over right at the bridge and just, at the narrows where it's narrow. Obviously, he's fighting the current, but he gets across. And the reason sometimes the pressure can be a little bit better because sometimes that toll booth puff is
it's light, yeah.
It's not what you think it's going to be. You always think it's coming, and then it always breaks your heart. And the other thing I was going to mention about coming out of the right is that even with the current flooding and thinking that, okay, if I go in farther, I have less current, and I'm going to get a better puff. I've found oftentimes you get a puff and then you get headed, and the boats that are a little bit ahead and to leeward here get a little better pressure, and they wind up in front of you. So that it rarely, unless there's a super strong flood, does it pay to actually beat right up against Taylor Point here and play the. Sometimes it does, but
well, you can't go in there because you got to go through the three spans.
Right, but if it's light enough and where the big cement block is holding the bridge together there. Mm-hmm. You can come in behind that, and then you get swept down to the third span, which is probably about, where is it? About here, maybe.
So it's all how you enter through the three spans, and I guess in a race that you don't have to worry about the three spans, you'd go right tuck in there. You'd try to get the toll booth puff as much as you could, and maybe later in the evenings when the breeze is a little more flighty, it's not as established as it was, in the heat of the day.
Mike, your thoughts?
Conventional wisdom is you go to the right, you go to Jamestown. But I have seen boats start on the line, go left, play the cone of Rose Island all the way out, play the shore of Rose Island, and then go across on Long Port, where it's kind of narrow.
Up here.
Yeah, till you get into the relief of underneath or the lee of the dumplings.
So you might cross right here before the bell or after
there.
Right there.
You take that starboard end as close as you can to Rose Island. And I think we have to honor that bell, don't we? At Rose Island.
We do have to honor it. Yep.
Yeah, so you pick your port ley line to that, and then you head across. And I've seen that work many times. I've seen you do it, John, actually, many times, and do quite well with it.
Sometimes it's desperation. Yeah, I'll just mention one other thing, which is that, and then maybe we should take any final questions. I often find, I want to take one more tack or go a little deeper in here to get out of the current on the flood. And when I come out to go to Z, I just can't, I can't seem to find a lift. And the boats ahead into leeward sort of lift up in front of me. And then sometimes there'll be a lefty at near the starboard ley line. And if you race Tuesday nights, you're familiar with this. Whether there's an ebb or a flood, there's often a lefty to be had there. So it's not just a current play. Any final thoughts from the panelists before we have? I haven't looked to see if there are any questions.
Well, I'll just lead with, obviously we talked mostly about southerlies because we sail in probably 60 to 70% of our races are in southerlies. There's all sorts of, if it's raining, it's blowing out of the east northeast, and we didn't cover that, but we could cover those in another one. Having your understanding of the depths of the bay is really important. Understanding some of the good weather models that are out there, whether it's sail flow or predict wind or any of the other ones, that's an important aspect. Know what you're going to be facing when you leave the dock. Make sure you know when the current's changing. Look at the pots. There's plenty of pots around to take a look at your, how fast the water's moving, and just keep your head in a swivel. And a lot of this is dictated by your start. If you win a start, yeah, you're unencumbered to your strategic goal. But if you have kind of a crappy start in your second or third row, you got to get some tactics involved to get to your strategy. So, none of this is gospel, but it's just things to look at. And thanks, John, for putting this on. This was great.
You bet. Mike?
Yeah, I agree with everything John says or Brad said. I think that getting out early is really key. When we start up by Gould Island, a lot of us are leaving from Newport Harbor, sailing down the bay, going, in the middle of the bay near Rose Island, doing it head to wind direction check there, do one in the harbor, do one down by the starting line. It'll be different, but it'll be consistent. And, like the current changes in different parts of the bay, the wind's going to be changing too because of the geography. So as we start down by Gould Island, you know where the right shifts are, you know where the left shifts are because you've taken your readings and you can set up your long-term strategy for that. Things like that are helpful, but that's what makes it challenging and that's what makes it really fun.
Last thing I'll say is some years ago I realized why am I going straight for the starting line, through by Tracy's Ledge under the bridge here, and I started following Bill Shore down the main channel and looking at the current. So you don't have time to if you have a long beat, you don't have time to sail all the way back up there. You get one look at it. So I'd encourage you to take a tour of that side of the bay if you have the time. Are there any questions, Bill, that are burning?
I don't see any.
We burned them out.
Yeah, I would want to point out one of the things that we've asked the race committee to do, and I call it a hybrid course, because we're racing so often on the north side of the bridge, is to try to finish us. I know that Mike has asked this as well, to try to finish us on the south of the bridge. So we may be doing some courses where we start up where the East Passage is, maybe go, to a windward mark, like just underneath the bridge, down to a gate, but then finish up near Z, all the way up. So we're talking about doing a little bit more hybrid because that part of the southern part of the bay on Wednesday is usually fairly open. They're usually spending more time in front of Goat Island. So keep that in mind, so that some of our northerly races are going to have a south of the bridge component.
John, can I make a couple safety comments? And if you could put the chart back up.
Oh, I stopped sharing at the wrong time. Sorry. Sure, Pete, go ahead.
So just south of the bridge, north of Tracy Ledge, there's an obstruction buoy there. So it's been almost 15 years, but that buoy slid to the west. And Charlie Shoemaker ran aground in there and told the Coast Guard, and they didn't do anything. And the next summer, I ran aground south of that buoy, south and a little bit west of it. Ended up in the emergency room with 21 stitches in my lip, and could have been a huge disaster. I got very lucky where I hit my face on a combing. But I've seen boats at the end of races come through the bridge and go between that buoy and the bridge. And there's 4 foot of water in a bunch of places in there. And I would strongly recommend that nobody go within you want to be 2 boat lengths south of that, 2 boat lengths west of that buoy, and never between the buoy and the bridge. If it's high tide, you probably get away with it, but that's a dangerous spot in there. The other comment is, if we're going to be starting later, the odds are we're going to be finishing up some of these races pretty close to dark. And we did a bad thing years ago. We were racing north of the bridge. We got in a northwesterly, but we got to the weather mark first, and light airs got around it and about halfway back toward the bridge, and they called the race because the wind just died. And all the boats that were up around the weather mark all got in tows and got towed back, and nobody picked us up. And we did not have a radio that night, and we did not have any flashlights on the boat. And we were dead floating right under the middle of the Newport Bridge. So we always take out 2 VHFs with us now, and I always make sure that we've got at least a couple of flashlights on the boat. So, we really screwed up that night, and nothing bad happened, and somebody did come along and tow us back. But we're going to have boats out at dark this summer, so be prepared.
Even though I was going to say, we still have the 30 minutes before sunset rule, or whatever that was instituted because the Navy, however, we don't have any more Navy boats, my understanding, but we're keeping that rule. And also, as I mentioned, we're going to try to get the finishes closer towards south of the bridge so that we can finish and get people in sooner.
Bill, those are good points, but the problem we had that I'm describing was we just got up to that special race mark north of the bridge by Jamestown, and the wind died. So everybody was supposed to finish down south of the bridge, but didn't have any wind, and it took a while to collect the boats.
Yeah.
So having some kind of portable running lights is good, and having flashlights and having a backup radio. So you've heard it here, everybody. In addition, the race committee will tow us in, but we've got to be able to communicate. So as people are getting towed in, look around and see if somebody's getting left behind. Let's wrap it up there, everyone. Mike Toppa promises it's going to get a lot warmer in the next 11 days.
I hope so.
And look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on the water shortly. Thanks Brad, and thanks Mike for joining us tonight on this.